What if the safest country in the world, when it comes to flooding, is also the one with the most to lose to it? That's not a contradiction. That's the Netherlands. 26% of this country sits below sea level. 17 million people sleep on ground the ocean could reclaim before breakfast. In places, the sea sits 7 meters above the rooftops. Boats don't pass beside the highways here, they pass above them. By any reasonable standard, this shouldn't be a place people live. And yet it's one of the driest, safest countries on Earth, flood-wise, anywhere near a coastline. Here's what nobody tells you. There isn't one story behind that. There are three, and for decades, almost nobody realized they were the same story. Why did a country that had already spent a century building walls against the sea suddenly need something that could open? Why does one province of under 500,000 people exist entirely because pumps have never been allowed to stop? Not even once since the 1940s. And why, after building what's arguably the most advanced flood defense system on the planet, do the Dutch still describe the job as unfinished? 3 questions. By the end, you'll see they're the same question. The easy answer gets repeated everywhere. The Dutch beat the sea. Here's the uncomfortable part. That's true, and it's also false. Figuring out how both can be true is the whole story. We start with a warning nobody listened to. In the late 1800s, an engineer named Cornelis Lely looked at the Zuiderzee, the great inland sea cutting into the north of the country, and proposed closing it off entirely. He submitted his plan in 1891. Parliament didn't approve it until 1918, 2 years after severe flooding along the Zuiderzee's shores finally forced the issue. This was its own project, decades before anyone had heard of the Delta Works. A much older kind of certainty. The sea does not negotiate. Construction began in the 1920s. 10,000 workers built outward from the middle of open water, from 4 directions at once, moving 36 million cubic meters of material into the sea itself. Woven willow mats went down first to hold the seabed against the current. Shipworms destroyed the timber that followed, so the builders switched to barite. Basalt went in next, stone by stone, placed by hand. On the day of the final closure, a 50-meter gap remained, current still running at 5 knots. They sealed it in one afternoon. In the single window of slack tide the sea would allow, 32 kilometers end to end. The Afsluitdijk, completed in 1932. The sea locked out of the north for good. With the water tamed, the same engineers turned to the ground underneath it. Ring dikes went up around sections of the former Zuiderzee. Pumps began draining the water out centimeter by centimeter. Pumps that have not stopped running, not for one full day since the early 1940s. The seabed that surfaced looked, to the first people who walked it, like another planet. Reeds were planted, the mud was left to dry in the wind. Roads and farms were mapped out before the ground had even finished settling. The reclamation continued in stages through 1968. Out of that came Flevoland, open water in 1940, dry farmland within a generation. But it took until 1986 for Flevoland to become an official province in its own right. Today home to just under 500,000 people, families raising children on ground that within living memory was the floor of the sea. Remember that condition from earlier, the pumps can't stop? Here's why that's not a detail. It's the entire province's foundation. Stop the pumps, even briefly, and Flevoland reverts to exactly what it was before anyone touched it. That's the first mystery, half answered. The second one starts somewhere else entirely, because this project, the one that built Flevoland, is not the story that follows next. That story starts decades later, in a different part of the country, after a disaster nobody had prepared for. On the night of January 31st, 1953, a storm built south of Iceland and drove into the funnel-shaped coast of the southwestern Netherlands, Zeeland, South Holland, the river estuaries, far from where the Afsluitdijk stood. At 4 in the morning, the old dikes gave way. By sunrise, 1,836 people were dead. One village alone lost more than 300. 150,000 hectares vanished underwater in a single night. In the middle of it, a mayor ordered a ship rammed straight into a collapsing dike, sacrificed outright, just to slow the water long enough for his town to survive. The lesson afterward was simple, and the country never wavered from it again. Never leave this to chance. What followed was the Delta Works, a new and separate program from the one that built Flevoland, built specifically to seal off the works. The estuaries of the Southwest, $13 billion, 43 years, a program that would eventually shorten the entire Dutch coastline by 700 kilometers. And this is where mystery number 2 begins. Everything so far had one rule: seal the sea out completely. Then engineers reached the estuaries in the south, and that rule stopped working. Those estuaries were alive: shellfish beds, tidal marsh, an entire ecosystem that depended on the sea moving in and out, twice a day, without exception. Seal it shut like the Afsluitdijk, and the barrier wins. The estuary underneath it dies anyway. So the same country that had spent decades locking the sea out had to solve a harder problem: build a wall that knows when to open. 65 concrete piers form the fixed skeleton of the structure. Between them sit 62 steel gates, each 42 meters wide, each near 500 tons, able to slide open and shut independently of the piers holding them. An artificial island was built in open water for no reason except to construct the pieces. One pier finished, on average, every month for 5 years. Ships capable of lifting 20,000 tons lowered each gate into place with centimeter precision, 30 meters underwater. In 1986, the gates closed together for the first time. 9 kilometers of open sea, sealed in 75 minutes. It's been tested by real storms nearly 30 times since. It has never failed once, and the estuary behind it is still alive. That's the twist sitting underneath mystery number 1, too. The Afsluitdijk proved the Dutch could lock the sea out completely. The Oosterscheldekering proved that total victory isn't always the goal. Sometimes the smarter engineering is the one that knows when to lose on purpose, in a small way, to win somewhere bigger. Rotterdam is one of the busiest ports in Europe. A wall that stays shut for days isn't protection. It's a different kind of disaster, measured in cargo instead of casualties. So the answer became 2 floating arms, 210 meters each, heavier than the Eiffel Tower, pivoting on the largest ball joints ever built. An automated system called BOS makes the call. No person presses a button. When a surge is detected, the arms swing shut, fill with water, and sink into place on their own. Completed in 1997, the barrier has closed against a real storm 3 times since. In 2007, in 2018, during Storm Eleanor, and in 2023, during Storm Pia, proof, decades apart, that a fully automated decision still holds up when it actually matters. Smaller rivers needed something gentler still. At Ramspol, 3 bladders of rubber and Kevlar lie flat against the riverbed, invisible until the moment they're needed. When the alarm sounds, they rise 10 meters in about an hour. No steel, no cranes. One storm pushed water to 8.2 meters against a barrier rated for 9.1. It held. Here's where the 2 statements from the opening finally make sense together. The Dutch beat the sea. True. Since the night of that 1953 flood, the Netherlands has not suffered another coastal flood disaster on the scale of 1953 across more than 70 years of storms. The Dutch never beat the sea. Also true. In 2011, engineers tested something new near The Hague. Instead of trucking in sand every few years the way coastlines normally are maintained, they dumped 21.5 million cubic meters of it into a single peninsula and let the waves spread it naturally over the following decade. An admission, really, that holding the line permanently was never actually possible, only manageable. Flevoland sinks a little further every year. The sea itself keeps rising a little further every year. Both statements survive because they're not about the same thing. One is about what's already been prevented, the other is about what hasn't been solved and never fully will be. So here's what was actually underneath this story the whole time. Why did a country of wall builders need something that could open? Because total victory over the estuary would have meant losing the very thing they were protecting. Why does a province of under 500,000 people depend on pumps that have never once stopped? Because pulling land from the sea was never a one-time act. It was a standing agreement, renewed every second, forever. And why do the Dutch still call the job unfinished after building the most advanced flood defense system on the planet? Because the sea was never actually defeated. It was only ever being managed, carefully, continuously, by people who understood the difference. The Netherlands didn't win a war against the sea. It just learned to never stop fighting it, quietly, every single day, and call that peace.